Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the Afterparty, Season 1, Episode 5, High School. In this episode, we finally find out what happened at the St. Patrick's Day party. And kids, so tough to watch. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Max for commissioning this episode. And apologies, there's probably some weird background noises. One is, as usual, a dog, but I also have an exhaust fan going in my bedroom or my office because I had been doing some resin work in here that I thought would be done by the time I started, and it isn't, but it cannot be moved right now. So I have it covered a couple times to keep the fumes down, and I have this for ventilation. So apologies, because I really, truly do hate recording with a fan on. I think it's really a bad look, but sometimes things happen. You guys, this episode, so when I said this was hard to watch, what I really meant by that is the overall realization, once you reach the end of this episode, that had anybody paid the slightest bit of attention to Walt, all of this could have been avoided. But because Walt is a non-entity, for whatever reason, like, everybody has been operating under the same, like, mistaken assumptions for 5 years, 10 years. How many years is this? I don't even remember. And I really love the way that, because I really want to draw attention to this, you guys. This episode isn't even called Walt. It's called High School. And in Walt's POV, Walt himself is in the background most of the time. And this really is remarkable, because you could argue that it's just like Walt falls into the background for everybody, but this leads me to believe that Walt falls into the background even for himself, which is so sad. Like, that really does suck. And it took me a minute to realize what we were doing, because for a minute, it looks like we're actually going to be with Walt. We start out in the car with him, and he's checking his hair and psyching himself up about this party he's going to throw. And, you know, we're with him, and it seems like, okay, I get it. And pretty quickly, it shifts. He gets out of his car. He runs into Anik and Jasper, and as soon as he encounters them, he falls to the back. And it's like he considered himself to be their friend, but they would not have said they considered him to be their friend. He isn't partaking in the conversation. He's occasionally making weird, feeble attempts to, like, chime in, but he never really fully completes a word. And everything that's happening is it's all happening as if there were no witnesses, even though he's literally in the room, because he is just not a person anybody notices. And I've got to say, you guys, like, there are times where you run across a character who really makes you look at yourself, and it made me realize, like, what a terror I have of this happening to me. I want to be memorable and to stand out so much. And the idea that anybody who had met me and spent any amount of time with me, if my name was brought up, that they didn't know who the person was talking about. Natasha, who? Oh, there was I think I remember her. I can't. No. they need to know who I am. They got to. And this isn't even really about, like, I'm certain that it is an ego thing, but there's, like, not even a particular thing I want them to remember exactly. I just want to know I made an impression of any kind. Like, it'd be great if I was remembered as, like, oh, she was a really cute one. She had a fun outfit. She was really funny. She had great stories. She was a life of the party. She was always dancing, whatever. That'd be great. But I really am okay with whatever, as long as I'm not nobody. And, you know, this whole episode with Walt's perspective, it was like being in a nightmare. Like, Walt's whole vibe very much is as if he were a ghost. And he is in the room watching things happen and unable to affect any of them. Like, bare minimum effects, really. So, there's a lot to get through for this episode, and I am going to try and sort of condense some things here and there. But one of the things that I want to do is really give a shout out to dude who's playing Xavier, because this guy is managing to fully embody the versions of himself everybody remembers. And this episode with the nerdy Eugene, who is such a tryhard and really, like, unsure of himself and constantly grasping for notoriety of any kind. In a lot of ways, he's actually like Walt, but the thing that winds up sort of, like, giving him some of the attention he has been wanting is his claim at the end of this, where he says that he had a 3-way with Walt and Chelsea, which it's hilarious to me that not only is Walt part of this thing, but, like, probably nobody remembers him. Also, that everybody sees Walt come out of the bedroom and thinks that he's a total stranger. The bit where Chelsea says, remember we had a St. Patrick's Day party at your uncle's house, to Brett, when Brett responds that, like, he only has one uncle who lives in Scranton or something. It turns out poor Walt is such a non-person that even though this is his home, nobody remembers that he's the one throwing the party. Everybody has this same weird idea that it's Brett's uncle, and they go running with that, and it's just becomes fact after enough time has passed and enough people get it wrong. So yeah, we have this, like, lovely bit where we run into Anik and Jasper. Anik is as nerdy as ever. Jasper is much more falling on the Anik side of the scale in terms of his nerdiness, but we know, he's attempted to cultivate more of an image these days, and it really is apparently about leaning a lot more into the pop thing. So we get Xavier pulling up. Xavier number 1, and he's playing They See Me Rolling, They Hatin', and he pulls in this, like, red convertible, and it's wonderful to see because what we've got going on in this opening is kind of a parallel with the way that the reunion went, and he came in a copter, as he would probably put it, and got the exact rave reception that he's clearly trying for here. But what he gets here is just eye rolls and sort of like, those expressions of disgust. And there's something so difficult about him standing next to the car, looking vaguely around, almost pointing at the car, and trying to get some sort of reaction. And it's just like, bro, what are you doing? And Jasper and Neek turn around. They're talking about how you can buy a lot of things, but coolness is not one of them. And I'm like, maybe it is, though. I don't know. I guess not. Because his coolness eventually, it seems, came from the confidence he got from everybody high-fiving him about the threesome. And, you know, there's men out there like Elon Musk who have all the money in the world and desperately want to be cool, and they're just never going to be. This part with Jasper, he says, "This is absolutely my fault. I told him if we want to take our band to the next level, we have to up our image." And why does his license plate say Xavier? Xavier is his middle name. I, by mistake, told him it sounded alternative. Why would you do that? I don't know. I regret it immediately. So this is fascinating because it would be really, really easy if Jasper were telling this part of the story for him to either play it up that he knew Xavier was headed for stardom right away and fake it in that direction, or if he were telling this story and he were being this like kind of snide about not thinking Xavier was going to make it, I don't know that I would believe it coming from him. But because it's coming from Walt, I am pretty much taking Walt as scripture, because Walt is by nature a fly on the wall observer. So if he says a thing went a certain way, honestly, everybody else's POV I'm going to question, not Walt's. Whatever he says is the way it went. I am fully accepting that's exactly how it went. And I don't know if that's a mistake or not, but I just thought I should let you know the way that I've chosen to handle this. So at this point, we find out that he's leaning into pop, and Anik is trying to say, I think you guys should maybe split up. You don't have a lot in common. You don't want the same things out of music. And we also find out that he believes Anik stole his spot at Stanford. And I love / hate the whole way this goes, because Anik is clearly more intelligent. And that doesn't always translate to getting into school, but you can see he just takes his life seriously. This is a kid who studies and does the homework and does his extra credit, and he does all of the extracurriculars that he can that are not sports related. And he probably had an unbelievable college essay, and he got in because he is exceptional. But what Xavier thinks is that this guy got in because of scholarship requirements, aka because he's black. That's very clearly the subtext. It's barely subtext. And anybody who is non-white and has attended college has probably run into some kind of comment like this. But black students, Asian students, and Hispanic students, I think, are the ones that get it like the most heavily. And it is wild to me how many students and parents think that if you are a person of color who got into a school, that it also means you didn't have to pay for your schooling. This is something you also run into a ton. And I just like, people are living in a fucking parallel universe, and they think that like you got in on scholarship, and also that scholarship was definitely full boat. And it's like, one, how do you know about the scholarship thing, which is unlikely? But two, most scholarships are like for a couple grand. You have a few really high profile half tuition scholarships. And if you're going to a school like Stanford, half tuition means that you're only paying $25,000 a year instead of $50,000, which is still insane. The full boat scholarships are close to non-existent, and yet there are fucking white folks out there who really think those are just handed out like candy just to get black students in the door. And it's like the only kind of scholarship that can happen in that way are sports scholarships for kids who are otherwise extremely lackluster academically, but exceptional for a college team. And that is also the exact type of scholarship that a lot of these same people would be fine with, because they're sports nuts. So they don't, doesn't even clock for them. It's so weird, you guys. And it leads to this really awful moment later where Anik winds up arrested and Xavier could have pulled back and not pressed charges. But because Anik said, I'll lose my spot at Stanford, I feel like if he hadn't actually said that out loud, maybe Xavier would have restrained himself. But he put the idea in Xavier's head, I think, that, oh, I could kill two birds with one stone. This guy fucked my car up, and I can get him out of my way and get that spot because I'm on the wait list. Which, by the way, the idea that you just get this one guy out of the way, and because you're on the wait list, you're just next in line, that's unlikely also. Like, I don't know if that's the way it's meant to have happened, and that Xavier did wind up going to Stanford. I don't recall if it was ever mentioned, but that was a really hard scene to watch, especially because they really go out of their way to let you know how different he is being treated versus Anik. And it's very clearly a race thing. And they managed to do it in such a way that it's like, they really toe a line, because that scene is a tricky one. You could either go full after school special all of a sudden and totally change the tone of the show, or you could go too far in the other direction and make it almost like silly, almost as if you aren't taking it seriously that this sort of thing happens. And I feel like they managed to thread a needle there where I believed what was happening, and it was also a little funny simply because it's so overt. And so you're just like, oh my God, this is so fucking annoying because you know what's going on. But it also is just incredibly not funny because you know this is real, that this happens. And Xavier is such a little shit. And there are so many things that add up throughout the course of the evening to why Anik would fucking hate him, and for life. And I really think it's interesting that we didn't know how this guy either stole his spot at Stanford, ruined his chances for getting into Stanford, or if we're going to go with what if neither of those things happen, and for whatever reason Anik was allowed to continue at Stanford and everything went fine. Even if he had been able to go to Stanford and it was all fine, he would know Xavier had been fine with completely fucking him. But despite everything from Anik's POV, we never get a hint of what Xavier did. And that could, of course, be explained by just, he was talking to a cop, and why is he going to tell a cop another thing that could make him have a grudge against Xavier? However, he told the story as if he was very much up against Xavier for Zoe's attentions, which still makes him look pretty sus. And he didn't have any problem being honest about that. And I have a feeling maybe he didn't fully think that through. So there's no reason for me to think he wouldn't just blurt out what happened here either. So either things wound up working out for him in the end, or he just isn't the type to hold that kind of grudge and dislikes Xavier just in general, but it's not the kind of vendetta that you would expect from an event like this, which truly is excusable. And it's a really wonderful parallel to Chelsea, because what happened to Chelsea is fucking awful. However, I would argue what happens to Anik is worse. And Anik's still on track with a pretty good life and has made a success of himself, while Chelsea has gone down the left-hand path, as they say, and has been constantly citing this party as the reason why she's continued to make such bad choices. And you can just see eventually when she comes to the realization that I was in control the whole time, I could have done something and changed the way it went. That's 100% true, because Anik could easily have just completely given up. This was a collection of circumstances that all were entirely unfair, and he would have very good reason to feel like the victim. I mean, he was, but he clearly pushed through and kept making the decisions that were best for himself despite this awful night. And so it just shows you the difference between the ways that you can handle situations. And I'm not trying to even like talk shit about Chelsea, because I really understand the urge to feel like you don't have control. It's just really convenient to separate yourself from any of the responsibility of things. So I'm not even really like shading her. It's just the kind of thing that's like, after years and years, when all you do is whine about how unfair your life is, if you never start to put it together that you're the common denominator in all of these choices, it starts to, you're just stagnating and not growing as a person and not facing reality. I can understand it up to a point, but there does come that point. So fucking, this is when we have, I love this, guys, Ned and Brett. And I don't know how they de-aged everybody, if it was just CGI, but I've got to say it was pretty well done. It's clear everybody's in a bad wig and, you know, it's fine. But for the most part, I felt like this was convincing enough in terms of their being 10 years ago. So we have Ned, and he is lamenting the fact that he got dumped by Chelsea. And apparently all the girls have had a crush on Ned. So Brett is just kind of like, dude, you could get with anybody. Nobody, like, I don't know what you're whining about Chelsea for, because I have my eye on somebody else, but you could have literally anybody here. So they play some football. He knocks into Walt. Absolutely no notice of Walt. We do actually get to see the thing with the yeast in his ear in chemistry class. And I love that, like, he winds up apologizing to Brett for getting in his way with the prank and offers to get Brett a paper towel because Brett didn't get him one. Oh my God. Then we have a lunch with the two Jennifers and Zoe, who is apparently like friends with them here. And Chelsea walks up, and she had been going to like eat lunch with them. When she walks up, one of the Jennifer, I think it's Jennifer 2, is like, hey, are you okay? And Jennifer 1, it's just that, like, he was like the most popular guy in school, right? Like, I just can't believe you broke up with him, like, so hot. And it's obvious that she has a massive crush on him and just doesn't comprehend why you would ever not keep him as long as you possibly could. And Chelsea's explaining about they're moving to different cities, they're going to different schools. You know, I just thought it would be better to do this now. And I love Jennifer 1. There's a party tonight and Ned will definitely be there, and it's going to be super weird. Are you like, I feel sad and like a little sick, like. And Chelsea says, well, you know, another thing is that tonight we could kind of pretend that it's not about you guys. And Jennifer 1 is not, she's like trying to say that she gets it, but then she immediately goes back into, but I do really feel sad for Ned. And Chelsea just puts her tray down and is like, you know what? I'm going to go. And she takes off. The only one that seems to really get it is Zoe, who is like, you guys didn't have to be total assholes to her. Jennifer 1, I thought she was being mean to me. Jennifer 1 is so awful. I truly hate her. So we have a little chemistry thing. We get to see that like Zoe and Anik were definitely flirting heavily. I love seeing Anik as much as he is a dork. He is fully flirting with her. Like there's no shyness exactly. It's like there's a bit of hesitance for a moment at the start of the interactions, and then once they get rolling, it's like 100%. And he is genuinely funny and charming, and there's a real like he's got it in the bag sort of vibe. And if he had not waited so long and wanted to like have the perfect moment, it could have worked for him. And I just it's tragic how it went down. So We have the whole thing with like him asking to meet her at the party, and then Brett doing the whole like the fake ejaculation with the yeast thing. We jump to the party. Zoe asks Jasper where Anique is and for him to come find her. And Jasper immediately calls Anique and is like, you have to get down here. And we find out that Anique is making this like meticulous CD. And he's taking too long to do it. I want to see what's on the CD, actually. Hold on. Because when he flips it over, it's Zoe's Tropes from A to Z. And I encoded a hidden message. The first letter of each song spells out Anique. I'm trying to say Angel. Oh, man, it flips so quick that I keep missing it. And I know it's probably not important, but I still want to see it anyway. But yeah, it spells out Anique, heart, Zoe, but Zoe is spelled backwards, which I'm not entirely sure why he would do it that way. Just have it spell, I guess it's because A to Z, but the E is before, well, I don't know. Okay. No sleep till Brooklyn. Okay. I get around. Que onda, Guerrero, I don't know what that song is. Heart of Glass. Everywhere. One Sweet, don't know. And then Ziggy Stardust. One Sweet Day. Oh my God, One Sweet Day. Right. I remember that song. So we jump to the party and Xavier is, he has bleached his hair. And this is when Jasper comes up and is just like, look, dude, we are clearly going in totally different directions. And I think pop is a fad. Ska is forever. You're pop from top to bottom. You can't do this in those clothes. We obviously just want two different things. And he dumps him. It's actually a well done scene. The two of them, like, Jasper is clearly just so horrified at the direction Xavier is going in and like regrets this, but is also like, you've forced my hand, dude. And Xavier is obviously blindsided, like just didn't expect this at all, and is obviously really, really hurt. Like this is coming through for him like an actual relationship breakup, which I mean, it is a relationship breakup. We have this thing where we think like romance breakups are the ones that you mean when you say the word breakup. But in life, a lot of us have friendships that wound up ending, and it would almost be better in some ways if you got this sort of closure on those friendships, because breakups, you have to announce to the other person, this is it. We're done. One of you has to like do that and decide to let go. Ideally, people can completely ghost even when they're in something, but mostly this is how it's handled. And friendships, a lot of people just sort of fade out of your life and never come back, either because you didn't reach out or they didn't reach out. So there's something to the closure of this that can feel better, but also be more painful, because you, like, friendships that fade, sometimes you don't even know it's happening until you look back and realize. And this sort of thing, there is a moment you broke up that you can really point to. And he said something about the Jasper to Xavier. Anique thinks that we're like way too different, and I think he's right. And when he shows up to the party, Xavier is so enraged that he winds up pantsing Anique and then shoving him into the pool. And I suddenly understood what was going on with the way that he was pranked at the party, because he had been pantsed and he was soaked when he stood up. So he wound up like in essentially the exact same position he had been in. And it felt very pointed, and it makes sense why he thought Xavier did this to him. And there's a moment that most of the POVs have where Anique stands up and Jasper comes over and he says, Xavier did this, and Jasper says, no, he didn't. We know that for the most part, this was Ken. But part of me keeps wondering if Jasper was talking about somebody else as well. Or if this, because there's a softness to his voice when he says, no, it wasn't, that initially made me go, is that guilt because he was involved? Jasper himself? And now I think it's softness because the history here leads him to understand immediately why Anik thinks it's Xavier. And to just be like, dude, I get why you, but that's not what's going on here, man. And I'm so sorry. You know, like, it feels like there's a whole other message. So this is just awful. You know, Anik goes down and like, we have the people filming throughout the night. So there's lots of like footage that we get to sort of see through the camera. Ned is losing his mind, cracking up. When Anik gets out of the water, he spots Zoe and Brett together and he has to like jump behind some chairs to hide because he's still got his pants down. And I love when Brett approaches Xavier and just like pretends to punch him, because even though it's clear Brett's a shitbag who was a bully, in that moment I just hate Xavier so much that it was very satisfying, even though I know it was like not at all done in defense of Anik. It was, you know, by no means. And also when he goes down and he's just like, this was a new jacket, and it's the same as him whining about his hat. So when we go into the bathroom, Anik is standing at the sink and he is blow drying the title thing that he made for his mix CD. And I really enjoy the parallels with the reunion night, because he was in the bathroom on reunion night taping together this little square of paper, like it's, you know, very, very similar imagery. So he gets given some backup clothing from Walt, which includes a Bush Cheney tank top, which is hilarious. Walt is asking him, do you think people are having fun? I want them to have fun so that maybe they'll notice me or remember my name, you know? And Anik seems to like take a moment and really see him for a second. And he says, I know how you feel, but we've got to put ourselves out there. I had a door open with somebody, so I made this mix CD. It says everything I want to say to her, but don't know how. That's why I've got to salvage this thing before that door closes. And it's very clear how this hits Walt, because he later on decides that he's going to streak. And that's his like trying to salvage things before the door closes. Bless him. It doesn't seem like he ever did it. It's unclear. There is a point where he shows up and it looks like he's naked. He had a robe on before. But since nobody mentioned it, I'm assuming that he psyched himself up and then streaked through an empty house, which is tragic. But yeah, so he tries to say something to Anik about like advice for talking to Zoe, but Anik turns on the blow dryer and totally drowns him out. So there's a whole thing with both Xavier and Chelsea seeming to hit it off as friends. Like they aren't people who had been in the same circles most of the time, and they hadn't gotten to know each other. But at this party, because they have both gone through a breakup, they are finally talking in a more relaxed way and connecting a little bit here. And they get drunk, and Xavier takes it as her leading him on. She says that she likes the hair, that she likes the jacket. He's so desperate for validation that in some ways I think it's also due to this. But he is taking these compliments as her like outright flirting, when the tone that she delivers these lines in it's not flirting. If you can tell a difference, like, you know, there's no vibe, but he wants there to be a vibe. So, and eventually they wind up very drunk, stumbling down a hallway, and eventually end in bed together. And he thinks that this is so they can hook up. And she's like, no, dude, that is not what I want. But because they went in there together, and she just broke up with Ned, so it's a big thing, everybody has followed them. And when he leaves the room, everybody is standing there. He has just been humiliated and rejected. This is the second rejection of the night in his mind. His life looks pretty empty and bleak at the moment for him. And he has an opportunity when they assume he slept with her to not only turn this into a bit of a victory for himself, just in terms of his image, but also to humiliate her and get back at her because she led him on, so he says. And he decides to go ahead with that and let everybody think that, and makes up all this kind of shit about how he's naked except for wearing Brett's uncle's purple heart. Like, it was such a weird story he's telling, but he's clearly loving getting to be the center of attention. And, you know, because Chelsea was so popular, this is a kind of victory for him. It's just really, really gross. Then we have Anik realizing that Zoe and Brett have connected because Brett is going to be going to school on the same coast as her. I think both their schools are in Providence. So he has already researched some of the, like, you know, spots where they're going to spend their downtime and is connecting with her on that. And Anik is standing there ready to give her the mix CD anyway, but because he can see what's happening, he realizes that it's too late. I missed my shot. And he decides that he's not going to give her the CD. But then what winds up happening a little bit later is the CD goes flying and eventually ends up in Brett's hand. And when Zoe sees it with her name on it, Brett assumes, or no, she assumes that Brett made it for her, which of course he takes full credit for. He puts it on. Her favorite song is first. It's a home run. And he 100% goes for it. So this all wraps with this moment of Jasper and Anik and Walt outside talking things through as Xavier comes out and like throws it in Anik's face about how Brett is sucking Zoe's face. And Anik loses his shit. And he goes outside with his baseball bat and he just trashes Eugene's car, which leads to this weird fight on the lawn. And eventually the cops get called and Anik gets arrested. And when we jump back to the present, Jennifer 1 is saying, I think we can all agree Anik killed Xavier. And Walt sits down absolutely fucking flummoxed at the fact that he is the one who just told the story and nobody gives a shit about him still. You can see how, like, completely disheartened he is. It's actually really sad. Like, I want this to be funny, but I just felt for him in that moment because he got to have the center stage and it still was like nothing. The second he's done with it, everybody else takes up all the air in the room. Walt, stay on me. Yeah, Anik is like, you know, trying to be like, can you get off my back? And eventually Chelsea is like, a great way to deflect is to accuse everybody else of murder. And Jasper says, that's right. And I was kind of like, interesting. I'm with child. How could I be the murderer? Jasper, that sort of makes sense. You kill someone and birth a new one in, the number stays the same. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? Oh my God. And of course, secondary casualties. Didn't notice this. Of course, Brett has just had his whole spot blown up. He had taken credit for like wooing Zoe, and it turns out a bunch of the stuff was fucking accidental. And Zoe is just disgusted. Oh wow, you have literally been lying since the beginning. Our whole relationship. I thought you just were lying about cheating, but it was fucking from the start. And he tries to say he made a mix CD that night that had those exact same songs and it looked the same. And she is just like, dude, fucking stop it. And honestly, Brett, you told her earlier, nothing but honesty and openness from now on. Didn't take you long, bud. You really cracked on that one pretty quickly. And she turns to Anik and just says, and why did you never tell me? I never knew. And he says, I didn't know you even heard it. And she says, I still listen to it. I made it a playlist. And that got me, you guys. That really did. Like, I loved it. So, of course, this is when the detective has to chime back in again and be like, Anik, I hate to say this, but it's still looking pretty good for you to be the murderer. Like, do you have anything to say in your defense? And he finally stands up with the note. I love Jasper, how stoked he is about this. This is real evidence. I found myself in the trash. Whoever wrote this killed Xavier, ripped this up, and threw it in the trash. It's pretty damning. And honestly, it's like his desperation to prove that it's not him has led to him like grandstanding really hard here in a way that he has decided whoever wrote this definitely killed Xavier. And then he came back downstairs and ripped it up and threw it in the trash. Like, he is saying things with a definitiveness that he hasn't been using this whole time otherwise. It's just full on, the murderer wrote this. Whereas before it was like, well, there could be a connection. And it was a very vague sort of measured thing. And then here it turns into like, this is written by the murderer, guaranteed. As long as we figure out who wrote it, we have them. So then he starts to read it out loud. I'm coming for you. You're going to see this is payback for what you did to me. Now's your time to feel the pain. What goes around comes around again. And then he starts to realize that it's rhyming, like that it's like lyrics. And she says, these are bad lyrics that he wrote and then trashed. And she goes and holds it up against this like kind of collage. Collage is the wrong thing. It's like a collection where he wrote down X marks the G spot lyrics. And it's like the same type of paper and the same handwriting. It was clearly written by him. And I was like, oh my God. So Xavier was the one who wrote diarrhea on his neck. That's the reason why he didn't get the handwriting sample, because he died. He perished. Yeah, I know. Thanks. Thanks, buddy. Oh, man. So here's my theory at this point. I've kind of pulled back on the Jasper is a killer. What I have decided, somehow, and this is wild, guys. I am making things up left and right. But the fact that Xavier wrote these lyrics about getting back at somebody, I don't know who he would still have a grudge against, but it feels like there was somebody who wronged him that we haven't heard about yet. And he was going to go to this, like, this reunion in search of getting even with them somehow. And that maybe whatever he set up to get even with them backfired. And he wound up screwing himself. Honestly, I would kind of love it if it turns out that nobody murdered him, but that there was like a bunch of people who perfectly reasonably would have killed him, like, or would have wanted to. And yet it was all just a fucking horrible, idiotic accident because this dude, despite making it big, just never really had his shit together. Was just always sort of a dork at heart. And that was like even though he had made it so big, there was still a part of him that never believed he deserved it, or, you know what I mean? Like, I would actually be sort of into that. So that's what I'm going to go with now, is that, like, actually Xavier was going to pull some shit. And it just wound up not working out for him. I don't know what that could have even looked like, though, because there's no reason for him to want to get back at Anique, because he wound up with a scholarship, it seems like, and he made it big in music, so I don't feel like he's got to be mad at Jasper. Unless he's just holding a grudge against Jasper for abandoning him, and even though he made it big, it's still not enough revenge. There are people that I feel like they say living well is the best revenge, but some folks, that's just not going to be enough. They want, like, acknowledgement, you know? So maybe it was that, but I don't know. I don't know. It's just, I feel like there's something else that we haven't heard yet. So Anique says, this guy's story shows that everybody here hated Xavier. My point is, anyone could have gone upstairs before me. And Zoe stands up and says, like, say, me. And he says, no, not like you. That is not what I meant. How do you know I didn't do it? I mean, you haven't heard my story yet, because we know you don't have a grudge against Xavier. Well, I didn't at the beginning of the night. And everybody is like, word? I love the way that Jasper, like, leans forward like, oh shit. And I have seen already in the thumbnails that the Zoe episode is animated. I'm very, very excited about that, because I feel like there's a lot of possibilities there. I really am looking forward to it. And there's a couple of honorable mentions I want to make. So, like, I mentioned the de-aging thing. Brett's wig is so bad. Also, Chelsea has, like, sort of extensions on the back. So she's got her regular short curly hair done up as if it's, like, half up. And then from underneath, she's got these curly extensions that just are not the right texture. Like, it almost looks right, but it's just not quite right, you know? And it was so distracting to me because the curls are way too perfect, especially in comparison to her actual hair. And I'm trying to see, oh my God, how could I forget Walt's hair is really, he's got kind of like a Bieber sort of thing going on, you know? And also honorable mention to the music that's playing. We have got some really, like, classic 2000s music going on. It's amazing. There's a lot of really nice touches to this flashback scene. It's not long enough ago to feel exactly nostalgic to me, because these folks are younger than me. They're class of 2006, and I was 2002. Not that much younger than me, but still. But yeah, this whole, I forgot that too, that when she and Xavier go down the hall, everybody's in line for the bathroom, and that's why she manages to actually squeeze past Ken himself, who is, like, looking after her with this desperate sadness, and Jennifer 1 happens to be there to comfort him. It's really funny now, knowing how much she was, like, throwing herself at him, really. And I say that, but it's like she was also doting on him. Like, she clearly thought he was worth it. You jump to the present, and she is so tired of his shit. He is a himbo, which seemed adorable at the time, and then he clearly, like, really didn't grow any further than that. And that sounds real to me. That feels like a thing. So, yeah, we have Xavier coming out. I'm just jumping back to make sure that I didn't miss anything. Oh, yeah. I forgot about how drunk Anique gets, because he's got a bottle of, like, I don't know if that's Alizé or Hypnotic, maybe, but he is, like, chugging out of that. Jasper, slow it down. Big bubbles. Those are big bubbles. Make them tiny. Anique's, like, face. Oh my God. It's awful, you guys. This is like, there's a lot of, what's the word I want? It's like the footage from the video cameras. I don't know what those striations are called. I'm sure there's a word for it to like sort of date when this was taken. But we have a little bit of like a montage in the midst of this to see all of the different antics happening at this party. Oh, that's right. We have the confrontation between Jennifer 2 and Chelsea. Chelsea comes out not aware of why everybody is staring at her. And Jennifer 2, hey, you hoe bag, I heard you had sex with Eugene. Oh my God, what are you saying? Shut up. You shut up. You shut your lying Monica Lewinsky mouth. You stand here in front of a jury of your peers and you try and tell me you didn't just hook up with Eugene in front of all the most important people in your life, Chelsea. I swear to God, you've been so freaking weird over the past few weeks. Like you didn't come with me to apply to Abercrombie like you promised on our 18th birthday. This is what I told you I was worried about at brunch, except so much grosser because it's freaking Eugene. And you know what's the worst part? This is what this is doing to Ned because he is devastated. And right behind her, you see Ned and Jennifer 2 frantically making out. And Chelsea being like, oh yeah, he looks really heartbroken. And then she projectile vomits all over Jennifer 1. And it's so gross, you guys. It's so gross. Like, it's just a brief enough vomit that it doesn't look super fake. And her just standing there with that on her, it's when Eugene was pissing off the balcony onto Jennifer 2's head. We're getting a little bit of a flip of that. There's a lot of little, moments this evening that are super similar to what happened at the reunion. Oh my God. This moment, the way the CD winds up in Brett's hand is really funny. So yeah, this whole thing is so fun to parse, and I don't know. The theory I've given you is like the best I can do. I know I don't have enough information to make like a complete decision here, but I also just want some reassurance, if you're listening, to chime in and let me know if my being suspicious of Jasper is totally ridiculous. Did you also have the same thought? Because I asked Owen, once we reached the end of episode 3, I asked him who he thought was a murderer, and he said Jasper as well. But then he said, although this episode kind of made me think that less. And I shared some of my observations and suspicions, which I think did convince him a little. But then once we reached the end of this episode, he wasn't sure either. So I'm going to go with accident at this point. I'm going to say there wasn't a murder. It was an accident. Okay, that's my official prediction. All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening. Appreciate you all very much. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.